Saturday mornings used to mean one thing. You'd wake up early, pour yourself a bowl of cereal, and plant yourself right in front of the television. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, the whole gang would be there waiting for you. Those Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons were part of growing up. But there's one cartoon from that golden age that most people have never seen. In fact, it's been kept off television screens for more than half a century. This is the story of why this one cartoon was banned for 50-plus years. Back in 1968, something unusual happened in the world of animation. United Artists, which owned the rights to hundreds of classic Warner Brothers cartoons, made a decision that would affect 11 specific films. These cartoons, produced between 1931 and 1944, were pulled from television syndication. They weren't just edited or modified like other cartoons of the era. They were removed entirely. The decision was permanent. The group came to be known as the Censored 11. Most of them were Merry Melodies shorts, with just one Looney Tunes cartoon among them. Directors like Friz Freleng, Tex Avery, Bob Clampett, and even Chuck Jones had films on the list. These weren't obscure, forgotten pieces. Some were considered technical masterpieces of animation from the golden age of Hollywood cartoons. The reason for the ban was straightforward. Each of these 11 cartoons contained racial stereotypes of African Americans that were deemed too offensive to air on television, even by 1968 standards. While many other cartoons from that era were edited to remove problematic content, these 11 were considered beyond saving. The imagery and characterizations were too integral to the films themselves. Among the Censored 11, one cartoon stands out as both the most technically accomplished and the most controversial. Released on January 16, 1943, it was directed by Bob Clampett, one of the most innovative animators working at Warner Brothers. The title was Coal Black and de 7 Dwarfs. The 7-minute short was a parody of Disney's 1937 masterpiece Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. But this wasn't just any parody. Every character was reimagined as African American, and the entire script was written in rhyming dialogue. The story was set during World War II, and where Disney's original had fairy tale innocence, this version had hot jazz music and adult themes woven throughout. The cartoon opens with a mammy figure telling the story to a child by the fireplace. The Wicked Queen is portrayed as a wartime hoarder, stockpiling rationed goods like rubber, sugar, and gin. The prince arrives in a flashy car wearing a zoot suit. The title character works in a laundry, waiting for her prince to come. The 7 Dwarfs are reimagined as soldiers on the home front. What made this cartoon particularly notable was the level of talent involved. The voice of So White was performed by Vivian Dandridge, sister of the famous actress Dorothy Dandridge. Her mother, Ruby Dandridge, also contributed voice work. Jazz vocalist Leo Watson voiced the prince. The animation itself was considered some of the finest work coming out of Warner Brothers at the time. The origins of Coal Black were more complex than many people realize. In 1941, Bob Clampett attended a performance of Duke Ellington's musical revue Jump for Joy in Los Angeles. The show was groundbreaking for its time, presenting African American culture and music in a sophisticated, non-stereotypical way. Clampett was so impressed that he went backstage to meet the performers. During those conversations, Ellington and his cast actually encouraged Clampett to create a cartoon celebrating black jazz culture. The suggestion was sincere. At that time, African American performers faced enormous barriers in Hollywood. Studio work was largely closed to them. Clampett saw an opportunity to bring some of that talent to the animation world. The Clampett Animation Unit did something unusual for Warner Brothers cartoons. They conducted actual research. The team made field trips to Club Alabama, a black nightclub in Los Angeles, to experience the music and dancing firsthand. They studied the culture they were attempting to represent. Clampett fought with producer Leon Schlesinger to hire African American musicians and voice actors, ensuring they received equal pay to their white counterparts. The cartoon was intended as both a Disney parody and a tribute to the all-black musical films that were popular in the early 1940s. Movies like Cabin in the Sky and Stormy Weather. These films showcased African American talent in ways mainstream Hollywood rarely allowed. Coal Black was meant to channel that same energy and artistry into animation. Originally, Clampett wanted the entire musical score performed by Eddie Beals and his orchestra, an all-black band. Schlesinger refused, worried about the cost. In the end, the band only recorded the music for the final kiss sequence, while Carl Stalling scored the rest of the film in the traditional Warner Brothers style. The film was nearly titled So White and de Seven Dwarfs, but Schlesinger worried Disney might sue over the similarity to their original title, so it became Coal Black instead, a reference that was itself problematic but seemed less legally risky at the time. The cartoon's problems began almost immediately. In April 1943, just 3 months after its release, the NAACP formally protested the film. They called on Warner Brothers to withdraw it from distribution. The organization took particular issue with how African American soldiers were depicted as comic relief characters during wartime, when real black servicemen were fighting and dying for their country, while facing discrimination in their own military. The character designs were the most obvious issue. So White was drawn with exaggerated features and dressed provocatively. Prince Chaman had dice for his 2 front teeth, playing into gambling stereotypes. The Queen character evoked mammy imagery. The dwarfs were caricatures. Every design choice, no matter how well-intentioned by the creators, reinforced harmful stereotypes that had been used to demean and marginalize Black Americans for generations. The dialogue, written entirely in rhyme and performed in exaggerated dialect, added another layer of offense. Lines like, "My hair coal black and my name, so white and I washes all day," weren't just creative wordplay. They perpetuated images of African Americans in servile roles, speaking in ways that real people never actually talked. But here's where the story gets complicated. The cartoon was technically brilliant. The animation was fluid and energetic, synchronized perfectly to the jazz score. The character movements had a liveliness that made them leap off the screen. The pacing was exceptional. Many animation historians and professionals would later rank it among the greatest cartoons ever produced from a purely technical standpoint. In 1994, animation historian Jerry Beck published a book called The 50 Greatest Cartoons, based on a poll of over 1,000 members of the animation industry. Coal Black and de Seven Dwarfs ranked number 21 on that list. Michael Barrier's authoritative text, Hollywood Cartoons, American Animation in its Golden Age, called it Clampett's undisputed masterpiece. Floyd Norman, a veteran African-American animator who worked on everything from Disney films to The Simpsons, stated that while the cartoon is considered racist today, it was an animation masterpiece that meant no offense. When United Artists pulled the censored 11 from syndication in 1968, the decision was meant to be permanent. Television stations that had been airing Warner Brothers cartoons for years suddenly found 11 titles removed from their packages. The ban wasn't just about network television either. Independent stations that often had more freedom to air controversial content were also denied access. When Ted Turner purchased the pre-1950 Warner Brothers animation library from MGM in 1986, he inherited control of these 11 cartoons. Turner made a public vow that he would never distribute or air any of them. The policy was absolute. They would not appear on his cable networks. They would not be released on home video. They would not be licensed for any use. Warner Brothers eventually acquired the library when they purchased Turner Broadcasting in 1996. The policy remained in place. For decades, the only ways to see these cartoons were through illegal bootlegs or at special academic screenings. The films existed in a strange limbo, owned by a major corporation, but completely unavailable to the public. In 2010, something unexpected happened. The Turner Classic Movies channel announced that 8 of the censored 11 would receive a special screening at the first annual TCM Classic Film Festival. The event was held at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood on April 24, 2010. This wasn't a casual showing. The screenings were sourced from restored 35mm film prints, presented in the best possible quality. Film historian Donald Bogle, who had written extensively about African American stereotypes in cinema, agreed to host the event. The context was educational, framed as a historical examination rather than entertainment. The screening was invitation only and held for an audience of film scholars, historians, and industry professionals. It wasn't broadcast. It wasn't recorded for distribution. It was a single event, one afternoon in one theater, giving a select group the opportunity to see these films in their intended format for the first time in decades. Later that year, Warner Brothers announced plans to release the Censored 11 on DVD through the Warner Archive Collection, their made-to-order disc service. The announcement suggested the release would include historical context, scholarly commentary, and educational materials to help viewers understand the films in their historical framework. That release never happened. The announcement was quietly walked back. Warner Brothers decided the potential for controversy outweighed any educational or historical value the release might have. The cartoons went back into the vault. More than 50 years after the initial ban, these cartoons remain off-limits for specific reasons. Unlike other controversial cartoons from the same era, the racial content in the Censored 11 isn't just a scene or two that can be edited out. The stereotypes are fundamental to how the stories are told and the characters are drawn. Other classic cartoons have been able to return to television after editing. Scenes of characters smoking were cut, jokes about suicide were removed. Even some racially insensitive moments could be trimmed without destroying the overall cartoon. But with films like Coal Black, there's no way to edit the content without eliminating nearly the entire film. The character designs themselves are the problem. So White, Prince Chaman, the Queen, the dwarfs. Every single character is drawn using caricatures that modern audiences immediately recognize as offensive. The voices, the dialect, the movement styles, all of it reinforces stereotypes. You can't edit out the fundamental visual language of the film. There's also the question of context. How do you present these cartoons to a modern audience? A simple disclaimer at the beginning doesn't feel sufficient. But an hour-long documentary before a 7-minute cartoon changes what you're actually watching. You're no longer experiencing the cartoon as entertainment. You're studying it as a historical artifact. Warner Brothers has taken the position that there's no responsible way to make these films widely available. They worry about the material being taken out of educational context and shared without explanation. They worry about people who might celebrate the stereotypes rather than understand them as historical wrongs. They worry about the company's reputation and the pain these images might cause. Over the decades, defenders of Coal Black have made several arguments. They point out Bob Clampett's intentions. He genuinely loved jazz music and black culture. He fought to hire African American performers at a time when Hollywood systematically excluded them. He wanted to create something that celebrated that culture, not mocked it. They note that early audiences, including African American viewers, didn't universally condemn the cartoon. Some people enjoyed it. Some appreciated seeing black characters in a major studio cartoon at all, even if the portrayal was problematic. Bob Clampett himself claimed he received standing ovations from predominantly black audiences in cities like Oakland when he screened the film decades later. Animation professionals point to the technical achievement, the timing, the music synchronization, the energy of the animation itself. From a purely craft perspective, it represents some of the finest work produced during the Golden Age. To ban it completely, they argue, is to lose an important part of animation history. But these defenses miss the fundamental point. Intentions don't erase impact. Technical skill doesn't justify harmful content. The fact that some people in the 1940s didn't object doesn't mean the objections raised by the NAACP in 1943 were wrong. The cartoon uses minstrel show imagery and reinforces stereotypes that were used to justify discrimination and violence against Black Americans. Christopher P. Lehman, a film historian who has written extensively about race in animation, put it clearly. No matter how much freedom Clampett gave to African American performers to contribute their voices and music, the studio maintained complete control over the content. They did the direction, the animation, and the writing. The dialect was written by white writers. The images were drawn by white animators. The decisions about what to include and how to portray the characters were made by white executives. Coal Black might be the most famous, but it wasn't alone. The other 10 cartoons in the Censored 11 each have their own stories. Hitting the trail for Hallelujah Land from 1931 was the oldest. It was also the only black and white short on the list, and the only one to star Piggy, a minor Warner Brothers character. Even at the time, it was considered relatively tame compared to what came later, but it still relied on stereotypical imagery. All This and Rabbit Stew, from 1941, is the only Bugs Bunny cartoon on the list. It features Bugs outwitting a black hunter character who was a caricature of comedian Stepin Fetchit. Bugs Bunny, one of the most valuable characters in animation history, appears in a cartoon that can never be shown. Angel Puss, from 1944, was the only entry directed by Chuck Jones, who would go on to become one of the most respected figures in animation. It was also the only Looney Tunes short in the group, the rest being merry melodies. Friz Freleng directed the most cartoons on the list with 4 films. Goldilocks and the Jiven Bears, from 1944, was essentially Coal Black, remade with a different fairy tale, featuring similar character designs and the same problems. Tex Avery, another legendary director, had 3 cartoons on the list. Bob Clampett had 2, including Tin Pan Alley Cats from 1943, which featured a cat version of jazz pianist Fats Waller. Rudolph Ising, who had co-founded the Warner Brothers animation studio, had one. 3 of the censored 11 have fallen into the public domain: Hittin' the Trail for Hallelujah Land, Jungle Jitters, and All This and Rabbit Stew. This means Warner Brothers no longer has exclusive control over them. Anyone can legally distribute them. This has led to an odd situation. While Warner Brothers refuses to release these cartoons officially, they're available through gray market DVD collections and on various websites. The ban is no longer absolute for these 3 films, at least not legally. But major platforms like YouTube generally remove them when they're posted, recognizing that just because something is legal to share doesn't mean it's responsible to do so. The other 8 cartoons remain under copyright and under Warner Brothers' strict control. They exist in film archives. Prints are preserved, but they're not seen. The story of the censored 11, and particularly Coal Black and Seven Dwarfs, raises questions that go beyond just these specific cartoons. How do we handle art from the past that reflects values we now reject? Should it be preserved? Should it be shown? Under what conditions? Museums and archives have one answer: historical context is crucial. These cartoons are artifacts of their time, evidence of how American culture viewed race in the 1930s and 1940s. Pretending they don't exist doesn't change the fact that they were made and widely shown. Understanding that history, including its ugliest parts, matters. But there's a difference between preservation and distribution. These cartoons can exist in archives, available to scholars and historians, without being released to the general public. That middle ground is essentially where they've been for 50 years. The debate continues in academic circles and among animation historians. Some argue that the complete ban has gone too far, that people should be able to see these cartoons with proper context and understanding. Others maintain that there's no way to present this material responsibly, that the harm outweighs any educational value. What's clear is that these cartoons, whatever their artistic merits, cause real pain to people who see themselves reflected in demeaning stereotypes. The images reinforce ideas that have been used to justify discrimination and violence. That's not an abstract historical concern. Those effects persist. The censored 11 represent a specific moment in American animation history. They were created during a time when racial stereotypes were commonplace in entertainment, when minstrel show imagery was still considered acceptable by white audiences, when the concerns of African Americans about how they were portrayed held little weight in Hollywood. The decision to ban them in 1968 came at a different moment. The civil rights movement had changed the conversation about race in America. What had been acceptable was being questioned. Studios were beginning to recognize that cartoons made for children had a responsibility not to teach those children that racist caricatures were acceptable or funny. That Coal Black and Seven Dwarfs was created with some level of good intention. That Bob Clampett genuinely admired black jazz culture. That African American performers were hired and well paid for their contributions. None of that changes the end result. The cartoon uses visual language and storytelling approaches that reduce Black Americans to stereotypes. For more than 5 decades, Warner Brothers has maintained that these cartoons should not be widely available. Television audiences, home video buyers, and streaming service subscribers have been denied access. The policy has held through multiple changes in ownership, through the rise of cable television, through the DVD revolution, through the streaming era, As of 2025, the censored 11 remain banned. Warner Brothers has shown no indication that policy will change. The cartoons are preserved in climate-controlled vaults, their film prints maintained for archival purposes. But they're not distributed, licensed, or shown. Occasionally, a print surfaces at a film festival or academic conference. These screenings are rare, carefully contextualized, and limited to small audiences. They're treated as historical documents rather than entertainment. The cartoons exist in a strange cultural space. Many people know about them without having seen them. They've become legendary for their absence, discussed more often than viewed. Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs, in particular, has a reputation that precedes it, described as both a masterpiece and a disgrace. For animation historians, they represent lost masterworks, technically accomplished films that can't be properly studied because they're unavailable. For civil rights advocates, they represent harmful stereotypes that should remain buried. For Warner Brothers, they represent a liability, pieces of company history that are better left in the past. The story of why Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs and the other censored 11 were banned for more than 50 years isn't simple. It's not just about one cartoon being offensive. It's about how society's understanding of race evolved, how entertainment companies responded to changing values, and how we wrestle with art from the past that reflects beliefs we now reject. These cartoons were made during an era when racial stereotypes were woven into American entertainment at every level. Movies, radio shows, advertisements, and yes, animated cartoons all relied on caricatures and imagery that reduced African Americans to demeaning types. Warner Brothers wasn't unique in this. Disney, MGM, Paramount, every major studio produced similar content. What makes the censored 11 different is that the stereotypes were so integral to the cartoons themselves that they couldn't be edited or modified. The only solution, in Warner Brothers' view, was to remove them from circulation entirely. That decision was made in 1968, and it has held for more than half a century. The ban raises difficult questions about art, history, and responsibility. Should offensive material from the past be accessible if it's properly contextualized? Or does making it available, regardless of framing, give it a platform it shouldn't have? There's no easy answer that satisfies everyone. What we can say is this: these cartoons exist. They were made. They were shown in theaters. They were part of American culture. And then, when society began to recognize how harmful they were removed. They've been gone from public view for longer than they were ever available. An entire generation has grown up knowing about them only through discussion and debate, never having actually seen them. That's the story of why this one cartoon, along with 10 others, was banned for 50-plus years. It's a story about changing values, about corporate responsibility, about the power of images to harm, and about how we decide what deserves to be remembered and what should be forgotten. If you found this look at animation history interesting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are so many stories from the golden age of cartoons that deserve to be told, and I'll be bringing you more of them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.